Hello everybody, Ellie here for WhoCulture. Another video stepping straight into 2025. You lucky lot, you! We wanted to talk about the War Games in Colour. It obviously aired on the BBC on the 23rd of December. We obviously had a lot of coverage for Joy to the World that we were in prep for, that we were trying to get done as quickly as possible for you. And so we weren't able to cover the War Games at that point in time because there's only two of us and we only have one pair of hands between the two of us and we don't have a time machine. So better late than never, we do want to talk about the War Games in Colour. And actually it's a good time to talk about it because we have some comments in the latest edition of Doctor Who magazine from Doctor Who producer Phil Collinson with regards to the War Games in Colour. So let's talk about it, shall we? First of all, I just want to give you my personal thoughts on it. So straight away, I will admit, I beforehand hadn't seen the War Games. I hadn't seen the original 10-episode serial of the War Games. So it meant that I was going into this completely fresh, completely blind, without really knowing anything about what the story was. I obviously knew that it was the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton. I knew the companions were Zoe and Jamie, but I didn't have that foreknowledge from having seen the original. Some people might criticise that, some people might say, well, that's not really the right way to go about it, but it does give you a fresh perspective as someone who watched only this version. Based on that though, what I would like to say, and again, there was a bit of criticism when I commented about this in a previous video when I spoke about the War Games in Colour. As a younger viewer, as a modern viewer of Doctor Who, I often find that I can be quite daunted and overwhelmed by the prospect of going back to classic Who and being faced with 10 episodes of a serial. The nature of television has changed so much since these episodes aired. And so as a viewer who's only ever been used to that kind of faster paced and more that kind of tension-driven storytelling, I might have been slightly put off before at the prospect of watching some of these classic stories. And so I find that doing this new kind of shortened, modernised to a degree, colourised versions of these classic stories is a really, really good thing. And I really, really enjoyed the story. And I think having it in this shortened format with those modernisations in there really, really helped to keep me gripped to the story. Now, I know some of you are going to criticise that and say, oh, what are you talking about? That's rubbish. That you're just not appreciating what came before. And maybe there is a degree of that as a younger viewer, but it's what I'm used to, and so it helped me to really enjoy it more than if I'd sat through 10 episodes at 25 minutes long for the story. I really, really like Patrick Troughton's Doctor. I felt like he was a mixture of Peter Capaldi at times and Matt Smith at times. He was kind of a combination of the two. Specifically, I feel like the scene where he was pretending to have come from the War Office really gave me 12th Doctor vibes. And equally, when he put on those funny glasses, it made me think of Matt Smith. So yeah, I really feel like Patrick Troughton's Doctor was a combination of the two. Obviously, he came way before either of those. But it is interesting to see where perhaps these new actors that have played the Doctor might have taken inspiration. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed him. And as for Zoe and Jamie, I think they were pretty good companions. I mean, some of the companions in the classic era could be quite irritating, a lot of screaming, a lot of just shouting for the Doctor's help. These two, I really felt like they were getting in on the action. They kind of gave me Amy and Rory vibes, like they weren't afraid to join in and try and help. It wasn't all about the Doctor will save us, it was more we will try and fight as well. And I really liked that from them. And it's not something you instantly think of for classic companions, for the most part. So I was pleasantly surprised by that. Obviously, as I say, I went into this having not seen the classic, and so that may sway my opinion on certain things because I haven't got the comparison to make between what has been altered and changed compared to how it was originally. Obviously, there were noticeable things that have been modernised or changed, but I didn't watch much of it and go, oh, that's been changed, that's been changed. And I didn't feel like there were things missing. So obviously they have cut things, but I didn't feel like there was anything missing. There's obviously the updated visual effects in there as well, some of the modern visual effects in there, so, replace some of the old things with newer concepts, such as the images of Gallifrey and things like that. I really liked that. I think that's a really good way to try and tie in this modern audience to those classic stories and keep them gripped and keep them engaged and keep it not feeling too hammy. Of course, one of the biggest things that has been kind of thrown in with this modernisation is the idea that the war chief is the master. Now, as I say, hadn't seen the original, didn't have much of a connection to the original. And so having the War Chief revealed to be the Master here didn't necessarily make me think, oh, they've utterly changed Doctor Who. I kind of thought it was, to a degree, if I hadn't gone in with slight knowledge, would have gone, oh, he was always the Master. But what I find the most interesting and the most clever and so brilliant about the way in which they did this. Also, let me just point out, this is a theory that lots of fans have had for a long time, so it hasn't been completely thrown in as a completely new concept. Fans have been theorising that the War Chief might have been an incarnation of the Master for some time, but obviously there's never been any sort of confirmation of that, or, it's just a fan theory. My favourite part about it, though, is that obviously the dialogue hasn't changed, and at no point in this episode does anyone refer to the War Chief as the Master. The way in which this was done was with a single piece of music. Having the Saxon Master's theme play when the War Chief was in a scene instantly gives modern viewers that recognition that, uh-oh, this must be the Master, because that's the music we associate with the Master.
You may have changed your appearance, but I know who you are.
But in using one piece of music or a couple of pieces of music, you've changed the entire backstory of a character without a single line of dialogue being changed. And I think that's so clever. I really, really appreciate that. And also, I was talking to Danny about this because as someone who is a massive score buff and loves the music, to me, instantly that's recognisable as the Master's theme. But that doesn't necessarily mean that other people watched that and thought the same thing. You know, to some people, Doctor Who reuses musical score all of the time. The theme from The Wedding of River Song is used in countless episodes after that episode that have nothing to do with the character of River Song or anything like that. So a piece of music might start off to be relevant to a character, but then can move on to be much more of a broad thing. And so this piece of music to some viewers might just be a villainous piece of music to go with a villainous character. It depends on your connection and whether you can recognise that this is the theme of the Master or not. But either way, it's kind of an inclination, it's a way of interpreting it, but it's not a way of explicitly saying either way whether it's the Master or not. But obviously, I think the intention here was to kind of lend a little bit of a backbone to that fan theory. So as I said at the beginning, we had some comments from Phil Collinson in Doctor Who magazine, and this is one of the things he commented on, and this is what he said. In my head, the War Chief was always the Master, and we've lent into that. We've got Murray Gold and Dudley Simpson's Master themes under some of those big confrontations he had with Patrick Troughton. It's brilliant, but when you imagine it's the Doctor and the Master, it becomes even more epic. I would have to agree with that. It did feel epic. Having gone in with not much knowledge of the story prior to watching, it didn't jump out as weird to me that this might be the Master. Obviously, I did know that he wasn't supposed to be the Master, but I think it just lent a little bit more to the story. It just made it feel a little bit more intense. It also adds to the fact that we know the Doctor got banished to Earth following these events, and if the Master is the one responsible for that, it adds a whole new layer to their relationship. So I do think it was a very interesting move to make, and again, I think my favourite part being the fact that music was the way this was done. With the story overall though, I know I just said about how classic stories can be quite intimidating when you see them split into multiple episodes in a serial. If you put all that aside and just look at this as the story it was cut to be for this 90 minutes, I have commented quite recently on wanting Doctor Who to have that to be more intense, to have higher stakes, a bit more drama, more tension, which I feel like has been lacking a little bit in the new seasons that we've had. If I was to weigh the War Games in colour up against Joy to the World, I think I would, on balance, say that I enjoyed the War Games more, because the story felt like there was more intensity to it. There was a decent, proper kind of stereotypical villain in there. There was some violence. There was never any gore, but there was a little bit of violence in there, which is kind of part of what makes those stories heightened intensity. And I think that in terms of when you weigh up the stories, I think I really enjoyed the War Game story better than Joy to the World. Is that maybe a controversial thing to say? I don't know, but it just goes to show those classic stories really do stand, and with a little bit of tweaking, a modern audience can enjoy them just as much. So one of the big questions, having now had this new version of the story released, is which version now is canon? Going forward, I would probably have to say that I think that the original version is what we should consider the true canon of the story. I think that's what we should be doing. But I do suspect that the colorized version is what will probably now go down as kind of the canon regeneration. But I think what's nice about this is ultimately it's just down to fan interpretation. You can look at either of them. There's nothing too much change that it's going to make much of a difference, aside from obviously the final regeneration, which I will get to in a second. But in terms of what the intention was, I'll refer back to Phil Collinson's comments, because it would seem that even the creators aren't too sure as to which version should now be considered canon. So he said, "I was also really excited about regenerating Patrick into Jon Pertwee. It was exciting because the regeneration was missing from the original, and I really hope it becomes canon now. Whenever they do those montages of all the regenerations, I want this to be in there, because I always felt it was like a missing bit of Doctor Who." Part of me doesn't want to rewrite the history of the show, which we have commented on plenty of times. You know, where do you draw the line of rewriting things and changing things for a modern viewer and then almost erasing what came before? And I definitely agree with that. I do think, though, for the purposes of the show moving forward, to keep that modern viewer gripped, that this new regeneration is probably what they're going to consider canon from now on, because it kind of feels more like it's not as such rewriting anything as opposed to just adding in a missing piece. So if you look at it like that, then essentially all we're doing is filling in a gap as opposed to rewriting something. So that's how I'm going to choose to look at it. So the story itself hasn't really changed, and we've just added a new element to that regeneration. The unseen part now has been seen. As for the regeneration, let's talk about that. So I actually really liked the scene. I thought it worked really, really well. Obviously, we'd spoken before how they had contacted someone on YouTube who had created this regeneration already, and if you watch them side by side, it is pretty much the same with a few alterations, a little bit of tweaking here and there. It is essentially the same scene. But yeah, I think I really liked it. I think the one thing I'd probably comment on is the scene itself seemed way more polished than the rest of the episode. Maybe they would have benefited from just maybe graining it up a little bit so it fit more with the rest of the episode, which obviously was older footage. But overall, I really, really liked it, though it was cleverly done. I liked the shots of the TARDIS console, all of those elements. I think it worked really, really well. But there are a few things that have come to mind following this new regeneration scene. I think probably the biggest one is now it's kind of, is it setting a precedent to change or update other regenerations from the classic series? Are we one day going to see an improvement on the Sixth Doctor's regeneration, for example? I mean, he does deserve a proper one, let's be honest, but again, there's something to be said for how much do you change and rewrite of the show. This one was slightly different because we had never seen that actual regeneration moment in this instance, whereas in other instances we had seen that. We have seen this happen before, obviously, with Twice Upon a Time. The first Doctor's regeneration was slightly altered, and we did start to see that orange glow coming for that. I don't know that I would want to see every regeneration changed to fit that orange glow look. I'm all for revamping classic episodes, but if there's already a regeneration in there, maybe make it look a bit better. But I don't know how I feel about completely changing every regeneration to fit in with all the others. Now, another thing that this regeneration has done is it's kind of maybe put the whole idea of season 6B to bed. If you're not aware of what that is, season 6B is basically, there's a fan theory that the second Doctor, between falling into the abyss and arriving as Jon Pertwee in the following season, in season 7, actually went on secret missions for the Time Lords in that gap between being changed. And it's basically a theory that had been put in place because when Patrick Troughton returned later on for episodes like the 2 Doctors, the 5 Doctors, he obviously had aged, and so it kind of put into question how he could have been taken from a time before the War Games when he looked so much older. But then obviously at the end of the War Games, the intention was that he regenerated. On screen, this has never been confirmed. We've never seen anything, but the expanded media has taken this and run with it, and there are plenty of stories revolving around this season 6B time period. But obviously this new regeneration scene kind of means that there's no gap between what we see of the Doctor falling into the abyss and falling out of the TARDIS as Jon Pertwee. There's no gap for these events to take place anymore. Although, to be fair, There's nothing to say that there wasn't a period of time between falling into the abyss and when we see him sat in that chair in the TARDIS as he regenerates. So, I mean, if you want to, you could definitely put this whole issue aside and say there's still a gap there somewhere that could be filled with this theory. But we do now have this kind of clear progression of events from the abyss to the TARDIS and then falling out of the TARDIS as John Pertwee that we never had in the original. It now just fills that gap. We have kind of a clear progression from the second Doctor to the third Doctor. Does it mean season 6B is put into question? Yes. But it has always been just a theory, and there's definitely still wiggle room for that to still exist. The other thing that sparked a lot of comments with regards to this regeneration is the fact that now we actually see actual future versions of the Doctors when the second Doctor is being given his options to choose who he wants to become. It definitely opens up some interesting questions about the regeneration process. Like, maybe all of the Time Lord's incarnations are predetermined. And it's just a matter of which one comes next, but every single one of them is already predetermined. It just opens up a whole can of worms in terms of what the regeneration process actually is. But then again, we've had bi-generation since then. I mean, there's nothing wrong necessarily with adding things to the process every now and then. But seeing actual future versions of the Doctor, again, because I haven't seen the original, I have seen it since I watched that scene. To me, it didn't necessarily feel too weird to see them there because I didn't know what it was beforehand. I did feel slightly cheesy. I did write in my notes, is this cheesy? But it didn't bother me that much. It was just kind of a little bit like, ooh, it's a bit strange. But yes, overall, I think it was really enjoyable. I think that I enjoyed the War Games in colour more than Joy to the World, which is a very bold statement to make, but a pleasant surprise. I actually really enjoyed it. I was really gripped. I actually found myself quite near the beginning thinking, I actually don't know how the Doctor's going to get out of this one. I was really gripped. I wanted to know how this was going to end. I thought it was very clever. As I did just mention Joy to the World though, do make sure that you check out all of our content covering that episode if you haven't already. That is the reason that this video is delayed, so my apologies. In the meantime, I've been Ellie for WhoCulture, and in the words of Riversong herself, goodbye, sweeties.